All right, we have been analyzing the budget for 2024, where the headline has been that Canada is raising the capital gains tax for the first time since 2001. The change will now apply to individuals that have gains and businesses that have gains over $250,000. You'll now be taxed on 2/3 of those gains as opposed to half. The first time changes have been made to this particular tax since 2001. Of course, the why of it is to fund billions that have been promised to build housing and make life more affordable, particularly for young Canadians. With that in mind, let's bring in Doug Porter, Chief Economist for BMO Capital Markets. Mark McQueen has been on the desk with me for the show. We know how Mark feels about the budget, Doug, but I'd love to get your view. If you were to grade the budget, what grade would you give it?
Oh, that's a tough one. So is it versus expectations, what we were thinking 8 hours ago, or is it versus 3 months ago? I would say versus what we thought a few hours ago. It's actually not nearly as bad as we were concerned about on the tax front. Clearly, the bark was much worse than the bite. But if we were to grade it from a couple months ago, I'd say it's mildly disappointing. It's, I'm not sure that a wave of spending and even a moderate tax increase is really what the economy necessarily needed at this point. I heard a lot of the conversation earlier. And I too am a bit concerned about this heavy dose of spending, even though it's incredibly well intentioned. We know we need a lot of help on the supply side, in particular on the housing front. But I don't think it's the ideal set of circumstances for an economy that's struggling to grow, still dealing with relatively high inflation at close to 3%, and a Bank of Canada that clearly wants to cut interest rates, but is somewhat constrained by what's going on in the U.S. and now the Canadian dollar.
Does the spending forecasted by the government, even though it's being covered to some extent by the capital gains increase, make inflation worse, do you think?
I would say very much so at the margin. I guess what I would add is we also have to keep in mind that the province has really piled on this year with a lot more spending. Very common theme among the 10 provincial budgets was wider deficits, a lot more spending. We're actually going to have the biggest borrowing program on record among the provinces this year, even bigger than during the pandemic. And so I'd say that when coupled with what we saw in today's budget and of course the lead up to it, I would say at the margin it does put a little bit more pressure on inflation. It makes the Bank of Canada's job a wee bit tougher. The governor actually suggested that in his press conference last week. He did point out that their forecast for real government spending has been lifted in the last 3 months, and that was even before what we learned from the federal budget. I don't think it really markedly changes the inflation backdrop. And by the way, I'll hasten to add that Canada is going in the exact opposite direction of the U.S. in recent months. We actually have seen a nice pullback in core inflation. But yes, at the margin, I think it makes the job a little bit tougher.
Doug, when you think about a year from now, did anything in the budget today strike you as a choice made or money to be invested that will make a material difference in any one key category a year from now? To me, lots of it looks like 5-6 years out, we'll be able to tell how those ideas played out. But a year from now, is there anything you would give the government credit for, that they've picked the right horse and we'll see a real positive sign in any one of these categories a year from now?
I would say the thing to watch is there any movement on housing starts? So for the last 2 years or so, we've seen a steady deceleration in housing starts, partly because of the run up in interest rates and the pullback in home prices. The market is responding to the signals that it's seeing. I would look for at least some modest improvement on the home building side. A lot of, as you say, a lot of these measures will take time to work their way through. That look, there's no magic wand on the supply side, but I think at the very least, the area to grade this in terms of success would be if there's any increase whatsoever in housing starts. We are not going to come close to the kind of wild, ambitious targets that people have been talking about. We're not going to see that. But at the very least, I think we could reasonably hope for housing starts to rise to the high 200,000 unit level rather than the low 200,000 unit level, which is probably what we're headed for this year.